most employers in America are not positioned to be health insurers and shouldn't be. And they should get out of the business of health insurance. And they're candidly potentially part of the problem. But they also, the flip side is they're going to be part of the solution.
Welcome to the podcast where we try to inspire better work performance. Thanks for listening.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me on The Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindy Baldy, and today I have Stacy Edgar with me. The question we are pondering today is, what if the biggest problems with American healthcare didn't start in Washington, but in your own leadership team? Stacy is a co-founder of Venture, an AI and digital health startup that works with employees to introduce a consumer-centric model of health insurance. Today's episode is sponsored by On-Demand Leadership. Are you growing faster than your company can develop its leadership team? We're your Huckleberry. Check us out on ondemandleadership.com. So, on to the show. Hello, Stacy. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Before we get started on our big question for the day, why don't you give us a little insight into the role organizations play in healthcare in the U.S.?
Yeah, love that question. It's so overlooked, but basically, for the last 80 years, most of half of America gets their insurance from an employer. And that means that the employer is in charge of buying the health insurance plan, picking out what it looks like, paying for it, at least in part, and really legally also is a fiduciary for their employees. They're legally in charge of their employees' health. And so that covers over 150 million Americans. And it's such an important detail because it affects so much in the way healthcare is delivered and also the way healthcare is priced as well.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it is overlooked. Like when we're having the national conversation, so you and I had a pre-conversation before this podcast, and you had the insight that maybe at least some of the problem, I would say it's probably broken in many places, but we only ever talk about it at a national level, at like the government or the insurance level. But yet we have this other entity that's involved that is the primary way in which most people are getting their insurance. And there are breaks on that side too.
Yes. I think the hardest part about healthcare is that there's so many actors involved.
Yeah,
your employer, a broker, a physician, a hospital, an insurance carrier, an reinsurance carrier. Like there's so many different actors, Congress, the president, and all of the different agencies under the executive branch. So like across all those actors, sometimes it's so stressful to think, where's even the leverage point for change and who's accountable for all of this?
I think it's really relatable because anybody who's ever had an error on a bill, like you go in and you try to talk to the hospital or the administration, and a lot of the times they'll be like, well, you have to go to insurance. And then you go to insurance and they're like, well, it's a coding issue back with the doctor. And like, it can be very tough. And I also understand that from any of these entities' perspectives, like they're trying to stay within their lane. Like they don't have the power outside of their lane. And so you have like all these different pieces that are supposed to be fitting together and coordinating. And it's like every single one of them has parts that are broken, and the coordination is just really hard. And the problem lands on the patient.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to talk to you about that today. And if there's one thing people come out of this talk with, it's a bit of clarity of who does what within the ecosystem, and maybe a little bit of power of how do you navigate it better, whether you're an individual family or you're an employer or you're a caretaker as well.
So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Well, you and I had talked about HRAs, which are health reimbursement arrangements.
But you got it, because like healthcare in the employer-sponsored healthcare space, it's all about retention. So you hit it. You hit the right word. Legally,
Thank
health
you.
reimbursement arrangement is just cash an employer gives their employees on a pre-tax basis.
Yeah. So give it, like, for everybody who, we have a wide variety of people. Obviously, there's like a work perspective here, and just to get everybody sort of on the same page, like, what are some of the big ways in which, like, the big choices that organizations make? Like, we have the HRA, which is the health reimbursement, and then we have HSAs, we have FSAs, and so lay out what those are and, like, maybe some of, like, the core differences.
Yeah. So, for most companies, they buy insurance from an insurance carrier, say Blue Cross Blue Shield. And then they may pair it with an HRA, HSA, FSA. All of those instruments are basically, they do some things the same thing. It's a way to give employees additional cash on top of the insurance. So, think about an FSA or an HRA. Basically, the employer's putting the money into one of those vehicles and saying, okay, you've got your insurance, but maybe when, this HRA money will help you pay for your deductible, or help you pay for copays, or help you pay for out-of-pocket costs. There are some different nuances on how each of these things are structured. And the biggest one is an HSA, health savings account, is fundamentally employee money. So once you put money in that account, that is the employee's money.
And it can go with
at that point. Correct. An HRA is employer money. So at the end of the year, it can expire, it can roll over in part, or you could decide it rolls over in full. Same FSAs usually expire. They're also employer funds. They usually expire every year. And it's like money that an employer might put in, money that an employee might put in as well. So an HRA, only an employer can put that money into that account. So I think the difference between all of these instruments is who's funding them. Sometimes an employer can be the only one funding it. Sometimes an employee is the only one funding it. Sometimes it's both. And that's kind of why you would go with one over the other. And that's kind of part of your compensation strategy, or, like allowing employees to take advantage of kind of these provisions in the tax code that may benefit them, or maybe they don't, depending on what the overall compensation structure is.
And so which ones are, like, when we're talking about how companies are a key player in the healthcare space, where do they come in?
So they're the ones fundamentally setting what's the offer for employees, what's the design. And, for over 100 million Americans, actually, something that people don't really realize, the employer is actually the insurer. Once you get to be a certain size of an employer, and companies often self-fund, meaning that they start to pay the claims directly to the provider, to, say, Baylor University, since you're honoring my Texan cousin right now. I guess I'm a Californian. I was about to.
We have a lot of California over here.
Yes. But anyways, the employer pays the health system or the provider directly. And then they're really, in this case, hiring an insurance carrier. You still might see Aetna or Blue Cross or whomever still on your ID card, because they're usually hiring the insurance carrier to be an administrator of that program. But what that means on a self-funded plan is that the companies are running basically an insurance company within whatever their business is. And that means HR is basically running an insurance carrier. The CFO is managing an insurance carrier. And that's true of nearly basically the entire Fortune 500, and actually most companies with over 1,000 employees or so that have this structure.
Right. Because you have to be a certain size in order for it to really work.
100%. Otherwise, it's volatile, it's risky. It just doesn't make economic sense. And the reason why it would make economic sense is basically, the cost of administration on the insurance side sometimes can save you like up to 30%. even up to 40% to do it this way. The downside of it is you're carrying the risk yourself. So say somebody has a NICU baby or needs a really specific prescription, you could be easily talking about $1 million claim. And that's where you carry the risk. So you have a lot more volatility in these plans as well.
Right. So it's like a pooled risk, basically.
Yeah.
When you have that many employees. Okay.
Yeah.
And so what's one story where you've seen where poor handling of healthcare benefits hurt employee morale, or one where getting it right really made a difference? We could go either direction.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think everybody has the story of, like where health insurance literally saved a family member or a friend's life. I'm actually going through it right now, unfortunately, where I have a partner who has been battling cancer for a few years. So
me too, by the way. I did my time in 2007. So
yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that.
No, it's okay. I mean, I made it. But yeah,
I feel like the people who know health insurance the most are actually people like us, who we have to know it because it's literally life and death. And we have to know it because that can mean getting access to the surgeon who can save your family member's life. It could also mean whether or not, you can continue on an entrepreneurial journey, or you have to declare bankruptcy because you have medical bills to pay. And luckily, and that's actually, like the company I built, we are a version of an HRA. So we allow an employer of any size to give the cash to their employees. And instead of a health insurance plan, the employee buys an individual plan and decides what's the right amount of insurance and what's the right amount of cash.
And with the HRAs, do they tend to also be with the larger 1,000+ employee organizations? They're
starting to. And the reason why employers of that size are looking at it is because of the cost savings. So, this year we've quoted one employer $350 million in cost savings. Another one was $52 million. It's easy to get into the $1 million cost savings, even with just a couple hundred employees. So like the mid-market or mid-size employers, or even small employers as well. And the reason why those cost savings exist, if I were to give the really short answer, is you move your risk in terms of potential medical claims to the public markets, and to basically individual plans, for example, are underwritten at the state level. And take a state like Florida, 20% of the population now are in the individual market and covered. So 4 million people. That's bigger than every employer in America in terms of their health plan. So the more, insurance is about the more people, the more the risk is spread out, the better pricing you have, the more leverage you have in negotiation. And so you have this virtuous cycle coming in that allows for the employee to get the same coverage at a fraction of the price point and saves the employer a ton of money. For somebody like me, I've known that this kind of situation in my personal life has been lurking for years. And so, we financially planned for it. So we look at things like our out-of-pocket maximum, and we look at okay, let's build up savings through the health wallet component of the product. And so that way, if faced with a decision, we're not choosing between leveraging assets and leveraging care. That's an impossible choice. So that's basically, I've been financially planning for things to go wrong for years, and they have, unfortunately, but we're protected.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you started planning without this even being on your radar.
That's correct. Yes. Yeah.
And so, and I'm sorry that y'all are going through that.
Thank you.
Hopefully it comes out on the positive side. Hopefully the outcome is similar to mine, where it's good care and everything settles back down. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it will be.
Yeah. We were very lucky. So, talking about organizations being very supportive, I was at UT getting my PhD, and they were just wonderful. They gave me the room that I needed to be able to get the treatment. Obviously, I had just world-class insurance because it is their own Blue Cross Blue Shield that UT has, and it was very good coverage. And that made a world difference. Like, I can tell you, I'm very loyal to UT and my department because of that. Like they all individually also came out and was very supportive, but like just have the weight of knowing that you're not going to have the medical bills on you and that like the system is going to work right is huge for building loyalty.
So true. I think about it though from a business owner's perspective too, which I am today. And I'm like, well, I don't want the company to pay for some of that. And I think that is completely justified in, from keeping a business alive and thriving and healthy. But at the same time, we also have to, compromise of like, you take care of your employees take care of your customers, and that's how your business grows. So that's basically the fundamental social contract in America. But I do think that it's no longer universal. I do meet employers who, one, if you can believe this, actually said to me, I'm going to provide health insurance because I'm legally required to. But the reality is, if my employees need care, they could just go to the emergency room and then not pay their bill. And if they need care again, they just go to a different emergency room. And I almost fell out of my chair when I heard this, but it's not the only time I've heard that perspective of, well, I'm doing this because I have to, but I'm going to do the absolute bare minimum. And also thinking about, what I knew about those employees, because we were quoting them for health benefits, that they were making near minimum wage. And I just got to thinking about the employees of like, oh man, a lot of really profound economic pathways really depend on the philosophy of your employer. And like whether or not, I think, for UT, business they're in makes taking care of people even more heightened. But if you're in a business where, maybe recruitment isn't such a pressure, or, you're like, I just don't have that philosophy.
When you're hiring minimum wage employees, you can think of them as fairly disposable, and many organizations do. Yeah. But then, like all of that costs money.
100%.
If you're going to treat them that way, you're going to have high turnover. And even if they're flipping burgers, there's still training that has to happen. And that means double people doing the same job, or just not doing the job well with fewer people. So, like this is pretty well documented. Like you retain your employees, you're getting a financial benefit. And if you are treating them like they're disposable, you're not keeping them. But I know many people are very short-sighted. Many leadership teams are only thinking about their term before they move on to the next.
Or maybe they don't have a choice. Like I think about what's going on with tariffs this year, or with all the different fluctuations in the economy, and that's a hard decision. So it's easy to place judgment on it. And of course, in the story I just told, I totally did. But I also, want to recognize not all of us can afford to be the employers we would like to be. And sometimes you have to make a decision between the health of the bottom line and the health of but also that can mean compromising the health of the workforce. And I think that's also where, like the space I play in every day is how might we change that? How might we make that a better win-win for employers and employees alike? And there's answers there that can and should be explored.
Yeah, we've seen this with companies for a long time that do that because the idea that your workforce is minimum wage and therefore low skilled and therefore easily replaceable opens up the gateway to do things like, well, I'm going to do it to the letter of the law, but not anything more than that. And they can take advantage of ER rooms and things like that. But once you get people who are going to be higher skilled and, presumably harder to replace because of that skill, then some of that works itself out. I would think that you're not like, they're not going to tolerate not paying an ER bill.
That's correct. Yeah. And actually, we had a case recently where new employee actually told me about a time they had to turn down what they thought was a dream job in the past because the health benefits just weren't up to snuff, and they had a family member in need, and that meant giving up a dream job. And so you're right, it does sort itself out. And I would say even so it's so interesting. There's a stat that one of our partner organizations, Morgan Health, did this research earlier this year. And 1 out of 3 small businesses are giving up their health benefit plan because of cost. And it's actually a really painful decision because most of them socially would like to still provide benefits. There's a lot of pride in taking care of your workers, taking care of your own. And they also know that's a competitive disadvantage if they don't, because there's just an expectation in market.
It's part of your benefits. Yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
But like we talked about earlier, there are so many players and each piece has its own breaks. But it does seem really weird that the moment that you get sick and it might be difficult for you to keep a job is the same moment that you absolutely need your job in order to have your insurance. Like that doesn't seem like a very, great plan. But I understand that that's, we all evolve over time, including organizations and the standards that they have. And so this is where we're at. And you can't just be the individual or the individual company that unwinds that. There has to be other forces in act.
Well, that's actually, there's in what we do. So when you get cash from your employer, you go out and you buy an individual plan that effectively is Obamacare, for lack of a better term. And the ACA or Obamacare has been the market you go to when you don't have employer-sponsored coverage or you don't have another option. And one of the things I'm super passionate about is the more employers adopt this model and join that risk pool in that market, the better it will get. It will transition from being this market of last resort to a more diverse, stronger market that then makes portability possible. It makes our dependence on job-based health insurance less.
That's a very good point. Yeah. Because right now, initially, correct me if I'm wrong, but the people who were forced into it, maybe didn't have a job, whatever, or underpaid, underemployed, I guess is what we call it. But as you said, as organizations actually start pooling their people who are clearly functioning for the most part, then you get a healthier group of people in the pool. And then the risk actually is distributed over more people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I hadn't really thought about it in terms of that, but yeah, that's actually, it does take away the dependence that we have on our job. So many people I know, may have wanted to switch jobs or whatever, but stayed because they knew the healthcare that they had and didn't want to do anything to jeopardize it. But a big barrier to moving jobs has historically been healthcare related.
Or starting a business. I am an entrepreneur now, but it took me so long to make this jump. And it was health insurance that held me back psychologically. I was like, oh no, what if? And finally, in solving this problem, when I talk to fellow small business owners, fellow entrepreneurs, it's like calling. We say oh, well, would you ever close up shop in order just because of health insurance? And they're like, oh, no. I'm doing what I'm meant to do. But the thing is, when I think about those same people, what we're building for is that so that they don't have to take on these profound risks, that they are covered. They do have great coverage, and you can pursue your dream, be part of the economic engine and innovation of this country. So,
which is not insignificant. Like, yes, for it is impacting one individual and their dream and maybe whoever they wind up hiring. But that ability to change and to take risks is one of the things that tends to make us cutting edge as a country. So
yeah, and small businesses also employ half of America as well. So it's not just, you're right. The key part is it's for that entrepreneur, for that person maybe who should be an entrepreneur and creates the next generational company that changes industry and society, and also the people they hire, the jobs they create, the opportunity. Yeah.
And what would you recommend for them?
Well, if I may be so shameless, give me a call.
You can be shameless. We're all right with that.
Yes.
Where should, and it's venture, but it's spelled differently. It's VENTEUR.
Yes. And it's a mashup of the words adventure and entrepreneur. And it's exactly thinking about that moment of you're starting a business, you're starting a new chapter, you're not letting health insurance hold you back. It's there for you as a safety net as you pursue your dream. So it's definitely meant to celebrate that entrepreneurial spirit. And the beauty of, doing the health reimbursement arrangements is thinking about, instead of, oh man, how do I pick between Aetna or Blue Shield or Oscar or whomever might be in market? You then just set a budget. You're like, this is what I can afford to spend. And this is what I'm going to provide my employees. And then I'm going to support them to do what's in their best interest. You take off that weight of needing to get it right. And like, it's already hard to choose for yourself. Think about having to choose for somebody else. I've been in those shoes and it was overwhelming. And it's such a weight off my shoulders as a business leader, knowing I'm providing for you, and I'm providing support for you to make decisions, but this decision is yours and I trust you.
Yeah, we've seen that. I mean, we've seen in a number of organizations where they have young people sort of as the interface, right? So they tend to be younger, oftentimes, like maybe not all the way through their education, maybe just high school. They're in these positions and they're young, and what they need is the extra $50, not a full-blown healthcare plan, because they feel like they're unlikely to actually need real medical care given their age and health. And what they really need, given their socioeconomic status, is more money in the paycheck. And this seems like a way where that might help contribute to some of that, people being able to choose what they need and want.
Yes. And I've heard CFOs say, well, maybe with this cost savings, maybe I'll increase wages. And you then have the flexibility to make some of those compensation changes. This year, health insurance for every segment of business is at a 15-year historic high in terms of price increase. And that there's a bit of a zero-sum game with budgeting. Like, that's being able to afford those price increases is going to come at the expense of something else. And sometimes one could argue there is an element of wage suppression that goes into it. Thinking about my total compensation includes my health insurance, which keeps going up and up and up and up. I remember getting those as a young worker. I worked in a global health, and you don't do it for the money. Let's just put it that way. And you're being told, hey, a $30,000 annual salary is like, this is so amazing. And living in Washington, D.C. at the time. And,
oh my goodness, that's like nothing.
Yeah, I was like, no. But then they're like, but your real compensation's actually like $60,000. And you look at it, you're like, yeah, but I can't pay my rent with that. So you're totally right about the young worker needing, like, I didn't need that much insurance. I needed more cash. So, and just being able to toggle, having a bit more flexibility to adjust for different stages of life.
Right.
That's huge.
Right. And even like, I mean, we have places that won't hire part-time workers. Like they have a lot of people who were older and then they retired because they just couldn't do like the long days, but they won't bring them back part-time because like it doesn't work well with their insurance options. But again, like these people are older already, which is why they wanted the part-time. And so like right now we're so constrained in these organizations where it's like everybody is getting a specific set of options, but it's basically full coverage essentially. And
yes.
and there are a lot of people who would be willing to not have that in exchange for like the benefit of shorter hours or, more money. Like it just seems like uncoupling those two things might open up options for organizations that currently are hindering their ability to just hire who's the best fit and make it work.
Yeah. That's such a good point. And it makes me think, we have 4 generations in the workforce right now, and their needs are so different. A flip side of what you're describing that I see in market is sometimes at the leadership level, with maybe your most highly compensated workers, the boardroom, the executive team, they're deciding the employee benefit plan. And they're deciding, well, what do I need for my life? And I actually saw a case of this about a year ago where it was an organization of 5,000 employees and only 200 participate on the plan. I was like, how is that possible? What are the other 4,800 people doing? And what had happened was that the management team had designed a benefit package that was really rich, looked great, but then they were only covering 50% of the cost. And the only workers who could afford that were if you were past a certain salary. And so the type of industry they were in, the majority of the workers couldn't afford the payroll deduction. It was enormous. And so like philosophically, I'd love to see this decoupling of employers picking on behalf of their workers. So you see that all the time. Like maybe, maybe it's benign, like people are trying to do their best, but you can't make everybody happy. But maybe it's actually more like, I'm picking for me. This works for me. If it doesn't work for you, that's too bad.
Well, and I think also people see life from the seat that they're sitting in.
Yeah.
And so I'm not even sure it's as intentional as like, hey, I'm going to do what's best for me. Of course, this is what people would want to do. Like, of course, we want the high risk option that we just come out of pocket for if something happens. They're not even thinking about like what a difference it means. I think there's at least a pretty good percentage of them who aren't even thinking like, okay, most people don't have the luxury of having an emergency fund. Like,
correct. That's known, right? Yeah, that's known in America.
Right.
Yeah,
it's very common. It's more common than not. And so if that's a problem that hasn't even crossed your mind, you're choosing insurance without considering that.
Most employers in America are not positioned to be health insurers and shouldn't be. And they should get out of the business of health insurance. And they're candidly potentially part of the problem. But they also, the flip side is they're going to be part of the solution.
Well, let's do both. Let's do both sides. So explain how they're part of the problem.
So, if I go to one of the signs, if I go to a CFO or finance team and they don't know the healthcare spend or costs, that's how you get these pricing negotiations that are maybe disadvantaged. They're not favorable to workers. That is also where like this kind of lack of knowledge of many companies in managing, being able to act as a health insurer, which is totally reasonable because they're not health insurers, allows the system to kind of game them a bit and for costs to go out of control.
Yeah. So let me just step back to get everybody on the same page. Is that what happens with these organizations is that the CFO, who already is a CFO of a company and has a full-time job doing that, and like there's a lot of information that they're already paying attention to in terms of being a CFO of a company. On top of that, the job of basically also being in charge of the healthcare, because it's, humans and healthcare, those are like two of the largest expenses for organizations, that they're essentially running a healthcare organization. So they're essentially running their own organization, and then they're running a healthcare organization specifically for their employees. And so they're doing these two different jobs, but what they applied for was running a company.
The company.
And
yes. And I know when we talked last, we talked about, last fall, we saw United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson get assassinated. And then afterwards, we saw this public outcry against insurers. Like it was, people were siding with.
He had a fan base.
Yeah. It was incredible and horrifying to watch. Yeah.
By the way, like I get that people are upset, but let's not shoot people. Let's stop that.
100%.
That's just 100%. My PSA. But
yes, 100%. But it also should so that then, you see different employer groups publish these surveys of 90% of employers are happy with their health plan. And these things don't add up. You don't have that societal outcry. Maybe 80% of businesses are happy, but not necessarily 80% of their employees are happy. You know
what that makes me think of, that stat? So before, I'm older than you, so maybe you won't remember this. Before Southwest really disrupted the airline industry, and, Southwest has changed over time, but Southwest disrupted the airline industry by basically being flexible and humane to their customers. Prior to the Southwest, as somebody who existed in the world, the rules for airlines were so rigid that, if you bought a ticket and you needed anything to happen, well, if you couldn't get there or you need to change it, you were eating that price on the ticket. And they really didn't treat the customer very well. And that was the standard of behavior. And if you had asked customers back then if they were satisfied, I think they would have been like, yeah, I'm satisfied, because it was the standard and the standard was being met. And it wasn't until Southwest came along and showed us that it could be different that people were then dissatisfied. And looking back, because I know that I can say this personally for how I thought about airlines pre and post, until you saw this alternative model and realized just what you were living through and how much you were just taking companies that, I won't say they were necessarily antagonistic, but they weren't putting any thought about you, the customer, into it. Until you had that alternative, I think you would have said, yeah, they're getting me from point A to point B, and been okay with the treatment because that was a treatment you were getting everywhere. So the reason why I bring this up is because I wonder if the 80% is just a general feeling that the standard is being met, but that doesn't mean it's a good standard.
I think you're right. I think there's a lot of fear too at every single level. So fear on the individual side. There's actually an SNL skit from a couple of years ago where there's Kate McKinnon playing
I love Kate McKinnon.
Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah.
And she's talking to a campaign supporter, and the conversation's like breaking up with a bad boyfriend. It's like, you deserve better. You can do this, girl. What's your deductible? Well, I'll help you through this. And
we're gonna have to link that skit in the show notes.
It's so good. Yes. But it's just goes to that psychology. It's like breaking up with a bad boyfriend. Like, will there be somebody else for me if I leave this relationship? Like, maybe this is as good as it gets. When we talk to insurance employers, they're afraid of nobody gets fired for. There's that old saying, right? Nobody gets fired for hiring IBM back in the day. Now I think there's nobody gets fired for hiring Blue Cross Blue Shield, because it's just this brand of like, oh yeah, this is the status quo, and this is like something familiar, and therefore it must be good. And in a lot of cases, it is good. Doesn't mean that there's not areas for improvement.
It's 330 million people or something very close to that in the US. We need variety in products.
100%. Well, also like the world today, AI is in every facet of our life, whether we know it or not. I think about Netflix and how angry I get when I know somebody has messed up my algorithm. Like, I'm like, someone's been in my account. I don't watch horror films. What is this? So like, it's that level of personalization exists. And so this is kind of one of the final frontiers of like, why are we hanging on to a one size fits none model when technology allows us to have something different today?
Yeah. And let's just take a quick turn back to like thinking about companies and leaders. What do you recommend in terms of thinking through impacting employees in healthcare?
I think I would encourage businesses to think about taking a broader definition on cost. So it might be tempting, for example, to maybe not fund a health plan generously, or do the bare minimum, or forego a wellness program, but then, the cost you're paying is on company culture. Which organization do you want to be at? The one that is, values health, or the one that explicitly doesn't? And you kind of then have employees self-select in based off of that. So it's having a broader view of, on one hand, you may save money if you go to the bare minimum on a pure dollars and cents basis that you can see. But the flip side of it might be in the form of absenteeism. It might be in the form of productivity. It might be in the form of the type of worker that you end up hiring.
Somebody who has more options may go elsewhere.
Yes, exactly. So it starts with, what's the culture you want to set? Who do you want to be in the market? What do you want your team to look like? And then from there, it becomes actually quite simple on this is what I need to do too. And today, the reality is, whether we like it or not, being a good employer, being a competitive employer, means you offer great benefits when it comes to healthcare. Well, and
it's a way to show you care.
Yeah, 100%.
And, if people if the main mechanism in which people at least one of the main mechanisms in which people are feeling a sense of belonging is work, which that's what they do. People try to find a place where they feel like they fit because they got to show up there every day and work with everybody. Then you're really sending a contradictory signal back when you're saying, I don't care enough about you to be concerned about your health. And you got to think about whether or not you want to send that. I do think there are companies that do that math and they do make the decision. A long time ago, I was a blackjack dealer, and they would come up behind us with a stopwatch, and we had to shuffle 6 decks in 30 seconds and deal it out in I think it was 3.5 minutes or something like that. Anyway, as they're timing you, they're saying things like, do you want fries with that? Which is an old statement from McDonald's. It was like part of a commercial and it took off. And basically the subtext of that was, you better pick it up because you're easy to fire and there's a line around the door of people who want your job. They knew that they had the upper hand and the power. And there are a lot of companies like that. And they do that calculus and they make that decision. I would encourage those companies from a management perspective to also pay attention to the turnover rate and the costs associated, like start tracking how much it costs to train somebody before they're fully functional. Which means that like you're looking at the fact that you have 2 people on a job for training, or you're looking at 2 people and their productivity and going, okay, neither of these people, the one who's new and the one who's existed for a while, neither of them are actually producing up to like the normal levels because this person who knows what they're doing is having to come over and train this other person, but they're still doing their job. And so this person who's getting trained doesn't have everything. And so you have a cost associated with that. And I don't think that a lot of organizations are tracking that really directly.
You're completely right. And you said it so well that it's a cost you may be not tracking that are sneaking up on you.
Yeah.
And actually it could be more expensive.
We are very fortunate that basically the people who are hiring our services are organizations and leadership who want to create a better environment. They want to develop their people. It's not because they're like hippies. They're not.
No,
I'm in Texas, people.
Business.
These aren't hippies. Like, it's because the profits and the performance, they go hand in hand with having like a well cared for, well retained, and you need people coming up behind you. So like you have some redundancy. So the problem with what we're talking about with the power dynamics is that basically, just like we were talking about with healthcare, where it's a system and you have to have external forces sort of impose some of the changes to happen. And that those external forces may be technological disruptions, or they may be political, or they may be government. I mean, there are a lot of external demographics is one that is disrupting everything. It's the same with like, organizations, and the minimum wage, the $7.25 minimum wage, is a signal that as a society, we're good with people not being able to afford their lives.
Yes. So that's what, if there's one thing, my life's work right now in our business is about addressing that affordability issue in healthcare, both from the perspective of the employee and of the business. And because right now, I do empathize with employers. Sometimes they're in an impossible situation. And
they're not the bad guys. We've talked about some of the bad players, but I love business.
Yeah. And some of them just can't afford to be the employer they would like to be, or to be able to afford this or this wellness thing or that wellness thing or whatnot, but they would like to, and they would, if they could, they would.
And it's a question mark whether or not it ever should have been their responsibility in the first place. And I'm not saying that I have the solutions, and I'm not saying that government is the solution. I'm just saying there's a gigantic question mark about, again, it's weird. They're providing healthcare to employees so that when employees get fundamentally sick and their job might be difficult for them to maintain, that's exactly when they need. That is a weird setup.
It is. I've been studying it, though. It's, when you look at history, it's less weird.
Oh, that's good.
The first companies to do it were mining and railroad companies, where they were kind of like frontier town companies. And also those were kind of dangerous jobs, very physical jobs.
They were.
So, like the way you get, thinking back to recruitment and retention, the way that they'd had huge turnover. So the way you would get a worker out to like the middle of nowhere and doing something kind of dangerous, like building a mine or mining or railroad, was to have a hospital on site that was
We still see that in West Texas.
Yes. And actually,
because the oil industry is pretty dangerous.
Some of our most famous health systems in the country are legacies of those employers. And they were founded by, if you look back all the way, they have roots in a mining or railroad company that was their initial origin story. So, and then World War II, yes, that made it an accident. So that's the accidental moment. I take for granted how many people know this story, but just in case, like basically, World War II, the whole country had wage freezes implemented. And then the IRS ruled that, or Department of Labor, one of the two said, hey, healthcare is a fringe benefit. It is not considered income. So then every company was like, to get around the wage freeze, they started offering healthcare.
I did not know that. I did not know that story.
Yeah. So, and then early 1950s, it got codified into law. But that's also where you had, Kaiser was a shipyard and they offered health insurance to their employees. So same story. It's like all of these businesses that were kind of heavy industry, maybe a little dangerous. Like this is their way of, and then World War II was the kind of shock to the system that because of the wage freezes, then this became an attractive way to get around that law. And then it spread from there. So we've had the system for 80 years and it's because of World War II. So
yeah, I mean, it's just like, these things don't grow overnight.
Nope.
Like there's a reason why we do the things, but at the same time, like maybe as a society, we need to think about whether we're still doing them in the best, like it fit then. We're in a different environment today. Does it still fit? Let's ask that question. I don't have the answer, but it's rare that thing that worked in the 40s would still here and work today.
It's so funny. I did a social media post, I think last week, where because when we say what I am fundamentally working for is the disintermediation of employer-sponsored healthcare, and where the worker, the employee, and their family have more voice at the table over how $1.6 trillion is spent every year on their behalf. So, and I would go so far as to say I'd love to see the end of employer-sponsored healthcare, but when we say that actually freaks a lot of people out. And I'm also wondering, I'm like, no, well, the system, some works for some. Like, I actually believe there's an opportunity for an evolution that is as powerful as like a full abolition of the system. And I said that on social media, and people who work for health insurance carriers were like, how dare you only call for an evolution? You should be calling for the end of the system. And I'm like, you are employed by the system. What is this? So even people working from within it are like, I'd love to see this end. And that is really interesting. I would not have suspected that
at all. But I mean, like, again, like we don't really do that well with abrupt change. I mean, sometimes you can't help it. Like sometimes like AI comes in, like the technology comes in and it's a big disruption, but usually people want a slower rate of change. They're better with evolution and not revolution. That's my observation.
Right. I think you're right. Well, it was so fun talking to you.
Yeah, today. I thank you for being on. I really enjoyed talking to you. Bye, Stacy.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on Management Muse. We are a podcast / YouTube channel that we hope is entertaining and educational. If you are on YouTube, we would appreciate you subscribing and maybe leaving a comment and a like. If you are on any of the podcasts listening to this, we would appreciate stars, following, comments, all the good stuff. We want to say thank you to Sarah and Rebecca, and then, of course, everybody at Design at Work. And then just as a last minute reminder, we also want to mention that we are management and communication professionals working in the field, but also have degrees that back us in science. All that being said, We are talking in generalities on this podcast. We do not actually know your particular situation. So proceed with common sense and maybe a little bit of experimentation on your end. And we hope that you make the world a more beautiful place by making work a more enjoyable place. See you next time on Management Muse.